Hi, welcome once again to the New England Fly Tyers video manual of fly tying. I'm your host, Dean Clark. This will be your introduction to the dry fly. And for the occasion, we've chosen the white Wulff because it is usually tied in the larger sizes and it's a bit less delicate than the several dry flies that will follow. Now, to the seasoned fly tyer, there's nothing uglier than a poorly proportioned dry fly. Each element, the body, the tail, the wing, the hackle, and the head, they all share different size relationships one to another, so proportion is paramount in this and all other dry flies. The divided hair wing and the single dry fly hackle collar will provide the greatest challenge. Precise thread control will be needed as you mount the wings. The first time you'll find yourself occasionally winding thread backwards, counterclockwise instead of the usual clockwise direction. You wound feathers around the hook before when you tied the caddis pupa, the woolly worm, and the leadwing coachman. That experience will stand you in good stead, but winding a dry fly hackle needs to be done with even greater precision and care. The white Wulff is the original pattern developed by the legendary Wulff back in 1929. This pattern has spawned dozens of variations, thus the white Wulff has evolved into a specific tying style. What best typifies the Wulff patterns is the use of hair for both the wings and the tail. Wulff originally designed the fly as a rough water fly. Being a rather robust and bushy fly, it floats well in fast water. However, its bushiness is due largely to the materials used. There may be a temptation to overdress the fly. If you concentrate on dressing it lightly, it will be bushy enough, at least for most of our eastern waters. The choice of hackle will greatly affect the quality of any dry fly. You cannot tie a good dry fly with poor hackle. There are some obvious and some subtle differences between good and bad hackle. Bert McQuiston will explain these differences as he previews the materials that make up the white Wulff.
While the original Wulff used bucktail for both the wing and the tail, today's tyers prefer to use hair from white calf or impala tail. Being similar, either will do. Calf tails are a bit curlier, but they are easier to find. The body could be dubbed with fur or wound with wool yarn. We've chosen a cream polypropylene yarn, often sold as floating yarn. As with any multi-strand yarn, you may have to untwist the strands to avoid creating a fat, bulky body. As Dean pointed out, you can't tie a good dry fly with bad hackle. The best dry fly hackle is found on roosters that have been genetically bred, especially for feather quality. Either the cape from the neck area or the saddle and the back of the bird is usable. On this fly, we'll be using the feathers from this saddle patch. The light feather with the dark stripe is called badger. You could also use cream or light badger. Rooster capes and saddles are graded for quality. The grade 1 is reserved for expensive prime capes. Grade 2 are of excellent quality for most dry fly work. Grade 3 capes have fewer, shorter, and webbier feathers, particularly in sizes suitable for dry flies. Ordinary barnyard fowl are not even worthy of grading. The feather on the left is from a grade 2 ginger cape. The one next to it is a cheap ungraded cape. They have the same barbel size, but notice the difference in length. Also, compare the amount of web in each. The small one has barely 5/8 of an inch of usable web-free length compared to 1.5 inches on the other. This feather is a twin of the one on the left. The two small feathers are also similar. Stroking the barbel down reveal a difference in barbel density, along with the stem. 50 compared to 70 barbels per inch. A fly tied with a small feather would have only about 60 barbels to support it on the water, while the quality feather would provide about 228. Compare the uniformity of the barbels lengths of the two hackles. The feather on the right is from an ungraded cape and was selected to match the length of the grade 2 hackle. It might provide tailing material for 2 dry flies, but that's about all. Before purchasing an expensive cape, check these points: glossiness, thickness due to feather density, length of the sweet spot, freedom from excessive webbiness, barbel stiffness, limpness of the stem, barbel density along the stem, and alignment of barbels along the stem. Those who tie small flies should also consider the quality of the tiny feathers near the head of the cape. A cape that passes on all counts is rare. If you find such a cape, consider yourself lucky. Don't let the prize fall into somebody else's hands. Buy it. Eat spaghetti for a month. Mortgage the house. Sell your firstborn if you have to. But buy it. Coming up, the 5 new skills.
Position the thread so that it hangs at a point 1/3 of a shank length back of the eye. This marks the wing tie-in position. Cut a small bunch of hair from the calf tail and align the tips. Check the length against the gape and judge a length of 2 gape widths. Position the bunch tips forward so that it extends 2 gape widths beyond where the thread is hanging. Tie in with loose loops, making sure the thread does not move forward from its original position. Wrap back with about 10 turns of thread. Bring the thread forward to the tie point. Lift the wing to the vertical position, cross the thread in front of the wing, and make 8 to 12 turns to create a lip of thread that will hold the wing upright. Notice how the bulk of the wing material fills some of the space between the 1/3 tie-in point and the eye. Divide the wing into 2 equal parts. Cross the thread between them from near front to far rear. Then cross back, near rear to far front to form an X between the wings, and make a complete turn around the hook before crossing front to back. Again, make several such figure 8 wraps ending with the thread in front of the wing. Now make a complete turn under and around the base of the far wing, holding the tip as you tighten the thread. Make a complete turn in the opposite direction, counterclockwise as viewed from the front. Do the same for the near wing, followed by a complete turn in the normal direction in front of the wing. Each wing should be 45 degrees from the vertical and 90 degrees from each other. They should also be 90 degrees from the hook shank as viewed from above. Trim the butt ends close to the tie-in wraps and bind down the trimmed ends. Continue winding back to the rear tie position. Select and cut another bunch of hair and align the tips. Position the hair so the tips are even with the bend. Hold it with the left hand while you reposition the right hand fingers at the front of the shank. Now move the fingers to the end of the shank. The tail will then extend one shank length beyond the bend. Transfer again to the left hand and tie the tail in with the loose loop technique. This Western-style tail is suitable for very rough water. For a less bulky Eastern-style tail, use only the amount of hair that makes up one wing. Trim the butt ends even with the butt ends of the wing. Bind down the rest of the tail and return the thread to the rear tie point. Cut a 6-inch length of single-strand floating poly yarn. If you are using multiple-strand yarn, it will need to be separated. Place the yarn on top of the hook so the end falls a bit short of the wing. Tie it in and bind it all down. Wind the yarn forward to the thread, tie off, and get rid of the tag end. Well, so far so good, we hope. Now, a few questions you might ask yourself. Are the wings in the right place and are they the right length? Is the tail long enough? Is the body smooth? Have you left enough gap for the hackle? Now, if the answer is yes, that's great. If not, you can still finish your fly, but please think ahead to what needs being done differently on your next one. Now, the next step is the hackle collar. The length of the hackle fibers is very important. They should be 1.5 times longer than the width of the gape. One sure way of selecting the right hackle feather for a given hook is to measure the hackle fibers against the gape and learn to judge what 1.5 times the gape width really looks like. Now make sure that you use the correct barbule length. Select a hackle feather, strip the fluff and any barbules that have too much web. Tie the stem under the hook and up close to the end of the body. Cross the thread to the front of the wing and leave it where the head will begin. Wind the hackle feather forward, filling the gap between the body and the wing. Each turn should be up against the previous turn. With a long saddle hackle pliers are not necessary. But be careful not to twist the feather. Bring the feather in front of the wings and wind enough turns to meet the thread. Make 3 or 4 thread wraps by taking the bobbin around with the left hand. Clip off the tip and the stem. Unlike nymph, wet fly, and streamer heads, dry fly heads should be as small as you can make them. Whip finish the head, your choice, fingers or tool, and apply a dab of lacquer. Let's review the tying methods. In a dry fly, proportion becomes more important than in any other fly, and here's why. When cast, a wet fly or streamer or nymph simply plummet into the water and sinks. It really doesn't matter if it lands right side up, sideways, or upside down. The weight of the bend, barb, and point will sort of bring the fly right side up, but only after it sinks. Now, in a dry fly, the aerodynamics come into play. They don't plop onto the water, they float gently down to the surface, or at least they should. Now, if it is upside down when it turns over at the end of the cast, it must right itself during the descent to the surface. Improperly proportioned dry flies can be tail heavy, nose heavy, top heavy, or otherwise aerodynamically unbalanced. During the cast, the dry fly is a miniature aircraft. It must have aerodynamic stability so that it will not make a crash landing. Now, once on the water, it then becomes a miniature watercraft. But unlike a boat, it does not float according to Archimedes' principle of weight versus water displacement. It floats because it's supported by the surface tension of the water. The same balance that brings it down gently and upright will serve to float it properly. Flotation can be enhanced with various waterproofing floatants with which to treat your flies. When it comes to fishing a dry fly, the trick is to make it behave like a free-floating insect, and that takes a bit of skill. Successful dry fly fishing depends on creating a drag-free float, and over the next few lessons, we'll demonstrate a number of techniques to do just that. Now, let's see how this white Wulff behaves as Bob Goudreau fishes it in fast water. The white Wulff and its many derivations were designed for water such as this. Fast tumbling currents will quickly drown a delicate dry fly, but the bushy Wulff pattern will ride out the rough water like a cork. Its high floating characteristic can be enhanced to achieve an even longer float by the way it is fished. Bob Goudreau will demonstrate some techniques for getting the best results from this high-performance fly. Casting upstream with any fly, wet or dry, presents the problem of slack developing in the line. Slack causes you to lose contact with the fly. Back in Lesson 1, you saw how to prevent slack by simply retrieving line at the same speed as the current. That's easy to do in slow water, but here, the current is much faster than what you saw in Lesson 1. Try as he might, Bob just can't retrieve fast enough to keep up with the line that's rushing down at him. The long, drag-free float the trout watch for is very short at best. The line drags the fly downstream, robbing it of the natural float of a real insect. The fly can also be pulled under, and this robs you of the excitement of a surface strike. It's not enough to give a trout a look at your fly. You need to show the fish an imitation that behaves as a fish expects to see the real thing behave, which means that the goal of the dry fly angler is to present the fly as though it were not attached to a line and a leader, and that takes a bit of skill. One way to extend a drag-free float is to use the high stick method you learned in the previous lesson. The line cannot belly if it's not on the water. As soon as the fly lands, follow the fly with the rod tip at the same speed as it's being carried toward you. A moderate lift while stripping in line can achieve the same effect. A cross-stream cast into fast water presents less of a problem as long as the fly and the line move at the same speed. Casting across a fast current into slow water is a common problem that we'll take up in the next lesson. See if you can spot and follow the fly on this next cast. To get the longest fishing time out of a cast, follow the fly with the rod as it floats past you. The fly will often sink when it comes up against a tight line. If you pick it up the instant it sinks, you'll lose some fishing potential. Instead of picking it up when it sinks, fish it back as a wet fly. Sunken dry flies often take fish. Here's another technique to use in upstream fishing. It's called the reach cast. The reach cast avoids putting the line or leader over the fish. The cast is aimed upstream, but as the line sails out, the rod tip is flipped to the side. This puts the leader and part of the line off to one side of the fly. In effect, it's an upstream cast that floats back like a cross-stream cast. Fish will see the fly before they see the line or the leader.